Hi there, Uber for Simon.
Yeah, that's right.
Jump in, make yourself comfortable.
I'm riding with Rosco, who's been driving with Uber for more than 9 years.
It's like a godlike situation. They can do whatever they like.
He's helping 1,500 other drivers in their battle for more rights.
The courts are recognising that, the drivers do require, sort of basic rights, the same as most other people.
But what happens next?
So there are courier drivers who are kind of watching. So the fact of the Uber case will give those courier drivers hope.
And what does it mean for other contractors in New Zealand?
We have people who have left the occupation and now claiming to be employees, knowing full well that they weren't employees at the outset. That doesn't seem right to me.
Welcome to NBR's Back in Business podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. Some Uber drivers are Uber delighted.
Uber has lost its appeal against a landmark legal decision that its drivers are employees, not contractors.
The Court of Appeal recently upheld a previous employment court decision that centred on 4 drivers. It found they were employees, not independent contractors. So, to understand the argument, we went for a ride.
The early years, easy as pie to make a good living. You could stick $100 in the tank, come out with $400 or $500 at the end of the day, which you can no longer do.
Rosco, as he wants to be known, no longer drives full-time. He has a backup driving gig because he could no longer make Uber work financially.
What's happening is that Uber is adjusting the logarithms and they're adjusting the riders and the fares and the drivers. And it's like a machine that we have no control over. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I think the economic model for Uber drivers these days is untenable. It's unsustainable. There's not enough money in it to, for instance, pay off, let's say if you need to upgrade your car to get into the job, you're going to find struggling with payments and struggling with mortgage.
Uber says it's the flexibility that it offers. And it's not a full-time job, you're an independent contractor and they offer you flexibility. Why do you not agree with that?
I do agree with it, and I think most Uber drivers would say that the flexibility is part of the attraction to the job.
So Uber's right in that it does offer flexibility?
Oh, absolutely. But what I'm saying is, like, the flexibility was there in the beginning, but the profit is no longer in it.
There is also the issue of control. Rosco calls it godlike.
Effectively, and I can't emphasise this enough, they can do whatever they like. They can adjust the fares, they can sort of give you more work or less work. Totally, it's like a godlike situation. They can do whatever they like. And what the recent rulings are saying is that, hey, the courts are recognising that, the drivers do require, sort of basic rights, the same as most other people, because in a way, an independent contractor, we could lose the job overnight.
Employment lawyer Jeremy Ansell, like many in the legal profession, has been keenly watching the case unfold.
The Court of Appeal, and I thought this was quite interesting, they ultimately disagreed that the drivers could be working for a variety of rideshare apps at the same time, because they found that if they weren't active on the Uber app for long enough, Uber had the ability to log them out on the grounds of inactivity. So it wasn't correct for them to say that they could be doing a variety of different work at the same time.
And this is the critical point they said in the judgment, that while a driver is logged into the driver app, that driver has no opportunity to establish any business goodwill, influence the quantity of work they receive or the revenue.
That's right, and they found that they did not have the ability to generate goodwill, so they could not establish their own business. Nobody was going to associate them as John, a great Uber driver who has his own driving business. They were going to see him as simply an employee of Uber and part and parcel of that Uber organisation.
Uber disagrees and is planning an appeal. In a statement, it said,
"The court's decision exacerbates the current state of uncertainty for workers who value the flexibility of contracted arrangements and for businesses across New Zealand that rely on contractor workforces."
Those other contractor workforces include some courier drivers with NZ Post.
There's all sorts of insecure work, but certainly a group that we are aware of is courier drivers that contract to New Zealand Post. We call them dependent contractors. That's not a legal term because the legal term is independent contractors, but the point is they're really not independent. So, yeah.
To Union's Kate McIntosh. How many of them do you represent?
We don't represent very many at the moment. It's hard for contractors can join a union, but because unions deal in employment law, like in the employment framework, it's really quite difficult to represent people who don't have employment rights.
Okay. You think that they probably should have employment rights. So you describe them as dependent contractors, these NZ Post courier drivers. Yeah. Why are they dependent?
They're dependent because they can't set the price. New Zealand Post sets the price. Yeah, that's the main reason, actually, that they are dependent on New Zealand Post. They can't use a New Zealand Post branded van for any other work. That's why we call them dependent.
And that's the similarity that you see with the Uber ruling?
Yeah,
one of the similarities?
Yeah, it's one of the similarities, yeah.
Okay. So you don't represent many, but you have actually initiated some action with New Zealand Post. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so the way collective bargaining works, and it applies to employees, is that either a union or an employer can initiate bargaining, which just involves sending the other party a letter saying, we hereby initiate bargaining and we want to cover these people. So we have actually done that quite some time ago with New Zealand Post for courier drivers, and it is, because we consider that they should be employees and that New Zealand Post should consider them to be employees.
We went to New Zealand Post for comment. It politely declined. But a main competitor to New Zealand Post also operates a very large contractor workforce.
Freightways have got around about 2,000 in total, so there's around 1,100 here in New Zealand, about another 900 over in Australia. The total team we have, though, is 6,000 people. Okay,
right.
So a third of our 6,000 people are contractors.
Mark Traffier is the CEO of Freightways. It runs 17 express package brands like NZ Couriers and Post Haste.
We've had the contractor model since 1964, so the business was started by contractors. That was the way it went. So it's always been our model. And so we've grown up with it. It's part of our DNA. But we like it for a whole heap of reasons. And one of the key things we like about it is the level of ownership it bestows on the service you're providing. Because if I am a contractor and if I'm doing Queen Street and looking after customers in this area, I am driven to be productive. I'm driven to provide an outstanding level of service. Because if I lose customers, my income can fall. If I gain customers, my income can rise. And that's one of the fundamental things we like about the model.
Flexibility and ownership, I understand. Do they get substantial reward or compensation for that? And does Freightways just set the terms all the time?
So what we do, we run an index called a sustainability index, and we have done for many, many years. So what that does is says, if you're a contractor for Queen Street, what does it cost you to operate, including your time, running the van, seeing your accountant every year, paying your ACC levy, paying someone to drive your van six weeks a year, so on and so forth. We calculate all of those costs, and what we do is make sure you earn more than that. And what we hope is that you earn a lot more than that. But it sets a bit of a bottom benchmark.
On the broader context, one of the concerns from, say, the union base is that contractors do not earn minimum wage.
Yeah, look, I bet it's tough. I flew back into the country on Monday morning. I landed at 5 a.m. Taxi driver was overjoyed to see me at the airport at 5 a.m. He took me home. He earned $100. He said that he'd been waiting since midnight. You wouldn't find that in a Freightways contractor model. So right. I think when you look across the board, you've got to think about couriers, you've got to think about taxi drivers, Ubers, builders. There are all sorts of people in this country who contract their services for reward.
So that begs the question, what, if anything, does the Uber ruling actually mean for other contractors and businesses they work for? Here's lawyer Jeremy Ansell again.
So obviously Court of Appeal, High Court, it has precedent value. So anybody who's reading that decision and they can see that their working arrangements are some way analogous to that of the Uber drivers, they're going to be thinking, well, we've got some legitimate arguments that we could raise here to show that we're employees and not independent contractors. Important to note that other types of workers, for example, courier drivers, they've already had their own decisions previously I suspect that it will give other groups of workers more ammunition and more incentive to want to try and challenge their own worker status through the courts.
The government says it won't comment on the details of the decision, although Employment Relations Minister Brooke Van Velden said in a statement,
"This case has contributed to a lot of uncertainty across the country for businesses that use contracting models. There are a range of workers and businesses across the country who are involved in contracting relationships and who will benefit from increased clarity of worker status, which this government will deliver."
It's not known what that clarity will look like, although there is a clue in the ACT Party's coalition agreement, which says the party wants to maintain the status quo that contractors who have explicitly signed up for a contracting arrangement can't challenge their employment status in the employment court. Etu Union's Kate McIntosh is not impressed.
What that would do, if the government goes ahead and passes legislation that does that, would keep people, it would, increase working poor in this country. And we don't believe that she has a social licence for it. There will be some employers who like it because the whole point of it for employers is that it reduces their costs. And when it reduces employers' costs, those costs go on to workers. And there are a whole lot of workers in this country who effectively earn below the minimum wage.
Lawyer Jeremy Ansell doesn't think the government would go that far.
The problem with that is you're effectively rendering irrelevant 20 years worth of case law on Section 6 ever since it's been in effect.
To be clear, Section 6 is the crucial part of employment law that helps establish whether someone is a contractor or an employee.
So I don't know that they will go that far. What I suspect they may do is maybe look at amending the wording of Section 6 to say that more emphasis should be placed on the intention of the parties and the labelling of the relationship. Mm-hmm. There's other options. They might issue some guidelines or regulations that sit alongside the Act that don't go quite as far as amending the definition of an employee, but giving employers hopefully or companies some clarity on what is an employee and what is a contractor.
And that would be welcomed by Freightways boss Mark Traffier.
To at some point down the track, usually after you've left, to decide, I thought I was an employee, is a bit disingenuous, and usually it's a bit of a grab to say, if I was an employee, I could have had holidays and those sorts of things.
Yep.
I'll make a cash grab for some of those benefits after I've left. That, to me, isn't right. Okay, so we have a law at the moment which says there's a bit of grey area in terms of these definitions, and you will have contractors who, in some cases, and I suspect this Uber case may be one of them, I'm not intimately involved in it, we have people who have left the occupation and now claiming to be employees, knowing full well that they weren't employees at the outset. That doesn't seem right to me.
But it does seem right to many current and former Uber drivers. Their union, First Union, has been actively campaigning for drivers to join.
Join us today so we can win the pay and conditions we deserve.
Join us today!
It's already lodged a claim for wage arrears on behalf of 1,035 drivers with the Employment Relations Authority. And Rosco, the driver we met earlier, is helping with getting even more drivers on board.
At last count, it was 1,300. 1,300, and there's at least something like between 200 and 250 Uber Eats drivers, but we still consider them to be, brethren, if you like. So there's like something like 200 Uber Eats drivers, which is coming up to about 1,500. But in the last few months, we've been going up about 100 new members per month. And on the day of the court case, the second court case ruling, where the courts agreed with our case, 50 members apparently signed up the day before we had the meeting the next day.
And the case is what? What do you think you as Uber drivers want?
Well, one of the things is that when we've got the app switched on, what that in effect means is that we need to be pretty much instantly available for a ride that might pop up. Let's say you're supposed to respond within 2 to 5 minutes to any call coming in. We've got to stay alert and connected with the system.
Yeah.
So what the union is arguing is that we should be paid at least the minimum wage for the time that we spent online, as opposed to the amount of time that we spent on any trip.
Right. Are there other rights that or conditions that normal employees get that you want?
typically if you're an employee, you can lodge a grievance over, some sort of sudden dismissal or whatever, and your guys will come to a meeting place and their guys will come, and they come in and have this meeting. Now, that should be a basic right. If any other profession had, sudden pay cuts or just reducing income over, say, a year or two, there'd be an uproar. So what we're saying is, well, where's our rights? Where do contractors have any kind of right to say, well, hey, is this fair?
Fair or not, the issue will drag on, as it will be some time until we see a Supreme Court ruling or government legislation that clarifies the role of a contractor. And that wraps up this episode of NBR's Back in Business. Links to any audio used are available in the podcast description. Thanks to Creative Director Michael Hickmott and Content Producer Joseph Hisayasu. Next week, Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran on tough times and turbulence. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.